The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council chamber gleamed under the artificial suns of Station Nexus, their surfaces reflecting the nervous energy that pulsed through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's podium, her dark eyes scanning the semicircular arrangement of alien representatives. The Zephyrian delegates rustled their feathered crests in apparent agitation, while the silicon-based Chronari emitted low harmonic frequencies that their translators rendered as worried murmurs. Elena had been warned about today's session. Intelligence reports suggested that the separatist faction known as the Void Reapers had been planning something significant. What she hadn't expected was for the attack to come from within. The motion before us concerns the expansion of hyperspace trade routes through Sector 7 Alpha, announced Councillor Thexara, her mantid-like form clicking as she gestured with multiple arms. The floor recognizes the human delegation. As Elena stepped forward, the lights suddenly dimmed. Emergency klaxons began wailing, and the chamber's protective barriers shimmered into existence around each delegation section. Through the transparent aluminum walls, she could see armed figures in dark combat suits pouring into the observation galleries. Void Reapers! Someone shouted in the universal trade tongue. Plasma bolts began streaking across the chamber, striking the barriers with brilliant flashes. Elena watched as several delegates dove for cover behind their podiums. The Aquarian ambassador's water-filled environmental suit began to steam as a near miss heated the liquid inside. But Elena didn't move. She stood perfectly still, observing the chaos with an almost clinical detachment. A Reaper militant had somehow breached the human delegation's barrier and was advancing on her position, a modified pulse rifle aimed directly at her chest. The weapon's charging coil glowed an ominous red. Human Diplomat. The Reaper snarled through his helmet's voice modulator. Your species will pay for poisoning the Council against our cause. Elena turned to face him, her expression unchanged. I'm curious, she said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather patterns. What makes you think death is something I understand? The Reaper hesitated, confused by her calm demeanor. What? Death? Elena repeated, taking a step closer to the armed militant. It's an interesting concept. Most species in the galaxy experience it as a termination of consciousness, a cessation of biological functions. But humans, she paused, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Humans are different. The Reaper's finger tightened on the trigger, but something about Elena's unwavering gaze made him pause. Around them, the battle continued to rage, but their small section of the chamber had become an island of eerie calm. You see, Elena continued, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. What the galaxy doesn't understand about humans is that we've transcended traditional mortality. Oh, this body can be damaged, certainly. But consciousness? That's far more resilient than most species assume. She gestured casually at the weapon pointed at her. Go ahead. Pull that trigger. See what happens. The Reaper's helmet sensors were undoubtedly detecting Elena's vital signs: steady heart rate, normal breathing, no stress indicators. It was impossible for any biological entity to remain so calm when facing imminent death. Unless. You're bluffing, the Reaper said, but uncertainty colored his voice. Elena's smile widened. Am I? Tell me, what do you know about human diplomatic selection criteria? Do you think the Council would send ordinary humans to represent their species among beings who could crush us with casual thoughts? Before the Reaper could respond, Elena moved. Not with superhuman speed, but with a fluid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics around her. She reached out and grasped the barrel of the pulse rifle, and instead of the expected energy discharge, the weapon simply stopped working. Nanotechnology, Elena explained conversationally, even as the Reaper stared at his suddenly inert weapon. Integrated at the cellular level. What you're looking at isn't just Elena Vasquez, career diplomat. I'm Elena Vasquez, version 7.3, with full quantum consciousness backup and a distributed neural network that extends well beyond this particular meat shell. The Reaper stumbled backward, finally understanding the true nature of what he faced. Around the chamber, his fellow militants were beginning to realize that their assault had stalled. The delegates they had intended to terrorize or kill were proving far more resilient than anticipated.
The Zephyrians have distributed consciousness across their entire flock mind, Elena continued, advancing on the increasingly panicked Reaper. The Chronari exist partially in subspace. The Aquarians share collective memory pools. Did you really think the Galactic Council would admit a species as fragile as baseline humans? Security forces finally breached the chamber, their weapons trained on the remaining Reapers. The attack had failed, but not because of superior firepower or defensive measures. It had failed because the attackers had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their targets. Elena watched as the Reaper who had threatened her was taken into custody, his confusion evident even through his helmet's visor. She felt something that might have been pity for him. He had been operating under assumptions that were centuries out of date. "Counselor Thexera," Elena said, turning back toward the center of the chamber. "I believe we were discussing hyperspace trade routes?" The mantid-like counselor's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. "Indeed, Ambassador Vasquez. Please continue with your presentation." As the chamber's defensive barriers lowered and the delegates returned to their positions, Elena reflected on the irony of the situation. The Void Reapers had sought to use fear of death as a weapon against the Council. They had failed to understand that fear required the possibility of loss. And beings who had transcended traditional mortality had very different definitions of what could actually be lost. The session resumed, and the galaxy continued its slow, complex dance toward a more integrated future. The attack would be analyzed, new security protocols would be implemented, and the Void Reapers would face justice through proper legal channels. But for Elena Vasquez, version 7.3, it was simply another day at the office, one that had provided valuable data on how to better communicate humanity's true nature to those who still thought in terms of flesh and blood. Death, she mused, was indeed an interesting concept. It was simply one that had increasingly little relevance to the beings who now guided galactic civilization.